Okay, our next interview is with Oscar Graham, and you call yourself the Graham Collection or the Graham Archive?
Graham Book Gallery.
The Graham Book Gallery, and it's still in Houston.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about your upbringing, siblings, what your mom and dad did, schools you went to, and end up with how you got bitten by the book bug.
Well, my father was in the military, and so I lived in a number of different places until I was 21. I believe I lived more outside the country than in the country. And so I went to schools both in the U.S. and I graduated from high school in Germany and went to Indiana University, and my telephone's ringing.
It's okay. Let it ring. Keep going.
And let's see, after college, I moved to Houston. My father had a sister in Houston who was in real estate and was buying up houses, and he bought some and was going to come back in after his retirement and manage them. And so I rented one of the houses and worked at the public library. And I found that I could, at that time, so many years ago, you could still find some decent books at the Goodwill and the Salvation Army and thrift shops. And I'd find some books and know that I could trade them to a dealer and buy other books that I wanted. And so I started doing that, and then it was basically a trade situation. And then I found some more books, and I assiduously went through and priced them what I thought was a fair retail value, and took them into a dealer who's no longer there, an interesting woman, and put them up on her table, and I said, I want to sell these books. And she looked at them and said, no. And I said, well, I've researched them, and I think I put fair retail value on them, and it's like 50% of it. And she looked at them and said, no. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, but why? And she said, well, I don't have customers for them. And I learned very quickly then that you may have a good book, but if you don't have a customer for it, you still have a good book.
That's right. And you may always have a good book.
Yeah, for a long time.
When did you first open your shop?
Well, I went to work for Herman Detering of Detering Book Gallery in 1977. The story was that initially he didn't want to hire me because I was his best customer and who would he sell books to. And so, but he did. And I managed it. We at that time had two-story buildings that were joined together, rare book room upstairs, and the rest filled with used and out-of-print books. And I managed that shop for about 28 years. And Herman graduated from Columbia Law School, and while he was in New York, he was really taken with remainder books in the stores. And so his initial thought was to fill the buildings with good remainders. People would come in and buy them, and be a great deal. And it soon became pretty evident that Houston wouldn't really support that kind of town, that type of bookstore in that town. And so my interest was in first editions and rarer books, and so we sort of, at least a portion of the shop, moved in that direction. And then, as they say, after 28 years, it became quite evident that the overhead for the general used and out-of-print books was no longer viable. And so we relocated to a much smaller space in the Museum of Printing History in Houston, where we rented space, and about 7-8 years ago, and then about 5 years ago, I bought the shop from Herman, and they sort of figured it'd tail in well from Detering Book Gallery to Graham Book Gallery.
Well, Texas has always been known for its eccentric booksellers. Would you consider yourself part of that group, or are you pretty normal?
I'm probably one of the least eccentric. As a matter of fact, a good friend of mine, a bookseller, his wife said, all your bookseller friends, you don't know anybody who's normal. And he said, well, how about Oscar Graham? And she said, not really. But I'm close.
How many book fairs do you do on an annual basis?
With our move, I sort of lapsed for about 3 years, and now do 2 normally, in Boston and Northern California. And I think with the move to the new location in Los Angeles, we'll probably start doing that again, too.
Yeah, I understand that's a pretty nice location.
Yeah, everybody that just did the fair in Pasadena has really thought it was first rate.
There are plenty of restaurants and hotels and amenities all over the place. So
well, one of the things that attracts me is evidently one of the hotels, a decent one, is 50 yards away. And
Sheraton.
My fondest memories of book fairs was at the Ambassador.
Oh,
and
don't get me started with the Ambassador.
Well, you know, as you knew, you drove up to the landing dock, dropped off your books, went to your room, and then went down for the fair. Well,
you went to the bungalow. Like
oh, yeah.
The bungalows.
And a number of little restaurants all the way around it. No, that was great.
It's one of those things that you just remember. You'll never be again. Talk about some of the people, other than Herman, who were an influence on you, or who were a mentor, or who you looked up to to emulate.
Well, as a mentor, it was a bit of a problem, and one of the regrets I have as a bookseller is I never apprenticed anywhere. And Herman had never sold books retail before either. So every day was sort of a new learning curve for us. And I think if I had the advantage of having a year or two of apprenticeship, it might have been much easier. And because we were in Houston, there weren't too many people to be mentored. Certainly some of the dealers, Harvey Tucker, Black Sun Books was very helpful in the beginning. Tom Taylor, who was in Austin, was also quite helpful and gave us good information. Yeah. Those are the two that immediately come to mind of the earlier book times that I began bookselling.
Okay. What do you think about your activity on the computer? Do you have material online? Are you a computer person? Do you hate it? Do you love it? Or what's your opinion?
Well, actually, early on, I worked with computers, and now this was a long time ago when you had to be in a hermetically sealed room and had the big tapes and things of that sort. So I was familiar with them. I was interviewed a year or two ago by the Houston Chronicle, and the gentleman who interviewed me had about a 45-minute interview, and at the end, as a throwaway, I said, well, I didn't come to bookselling because I wanted to be a computer jockey, and that was the tagline he put under my picture. So,
it's a good line.
Yeah. But no, it's true. I mean, the interaction not only with the book itself, but the people that come in. I'm not, by and large, a great person people, but if one has interest in the same materials or authors or background, I find it quite fascinating.
So what percentage of your inventory do you have online?
Probably when I bought the shopper from Herman, I stopped putting books online. And the previous books that have been there, I've left up and continue to sell over time. But my thought is probably, maybe not accurate, but is that if people know that I have books that I'm not putting online, they'll come in to see them and possibly browse and find something else.
You hope.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hope springs eternal. Talk a little bit to me about some of the great booksellers of our era and some of the people you look at as like rising stars in the trade.
Well, I think probably the people I would name, Zeitlin, Harvey Tucker, Heritage Boys, have already been named many times over. It's certainly Palm Harrington is a rising star. There seems to be, I don't know if you noticed it on the ABAA chat line, but a number of, I think primarily older dealers who are concerned about new dealers coming along and where are they. And there's a young man that works for Ken Sanders, Kent, who is quite young and he didn't form a coterie, but there's a coterie of young book dealers that I think are primarily unknown to a lot of the older ABAA dealers that are going to do very well.
Yeah, they hang out with each other, and he's a good guy.
Yeah,
he's a nice young man. Here's a question, Oscar, that I ask a lot of people: if you were entering the book trade today, could you? Would you?
Well, certainly I would. How successful they would be, how successful one would be. The dynamics of it, I think, and this is what I'm betting on with the small shop that I have and keeping an open shop, is that there will be a niche market for at least a certain type of books. Unfortunately, I think in some respects, a lot of the collecting has become pyramided with the one or two top books by any author being collected and nothing else.
Yeah.
And the same goes true in other genres as well. But I think there is a feasible future for, as I say, a niche market where people are going to actually want to come in, see the book, know that they want it, or maybe be informed as to why they might want it. And I also think that, as I think probably most book dealers do, there's a great advantage to dealing with a professional book dealer, because in my mind, it seems to me there's an awful lot of people who are buying books online that when it becomes time for them or their estate to sell them, they're going to be sadly disappointed that they're not what they had thought they were buying. A gentleman not long ago came in with 2 copies of a Truman Capote book, and I looked at it. They were purportedly signed. And I looked at them and I said, "Did you buy these on the internet?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Were they cheap?" And he said, "Yes." And they weren't even good forgeries.
That's unfortunate that we have people like Flat Signed running around. But hey, everybody's going to make a buck, I guess. What do you think about the economy and the challenge of the economy as we move forward? The last couple of years have been pretty brutal. Do you see it continuing? Do you see it getting better? What's your take?
Well, I think many people with whom I've discussed it, a couple of things have happened. One, the great crash that everybody feared was averted, but as a result of the fear of it, many people are sitting on their money and being very cautious. Yeah. I think, like a lot of other people I've spoken with, it seems to be loosening up, and one is optimistic that it will continue to loosen up and get better. But it seems to. I must tell you that 2009 was an incredibly bad year for me. Yeah. 2010 was so much better. I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I couldn't tell the difference between 2008, 2009, and 2010.
Oh, really?
They were all grim.
I knew exactly when I had a bit of a problem, because in 2009, right before it started, I had a bit of money in the bank, and I said, well, I need some nice books to have. And so I went out and bought 2 or 3 quite expensive books. I was going to show them off in the shop, and literally 2 weeks later, kaboom.
Well, that'll happen. Yeah. That'll happen. With the economy being the way it is, do you still issue catalogs? No,
and the reason is twofold. One, I think I may be wrong about this. There's certainly a hardcore of people who read catalogs, but an awful lot of them don't. Yeah. I have a very good customer who has told me he wouldn't read a catalog. He just goes to the internet if he wants to find something and looks for it.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. But there's certain dangers out there.
As to what?
In the internet.
Oh, well, I think many dangers in the one example that comes to mind is I got a copy of a book by Tom Lee, Peleliu Landing. You may be familiar with. And so I went to the internet to see what people were pricing it, and the first entry I read, it said the first collaboration between Carl Herzog, the Texas printer, and Tom Lee. And I said, that doesn't sound quite right. So I went to the bibliography, and indeed it was the 4th collaboration. And then I read there were 3 other copies online, and I read them all, and each one said the first collaboration. So somebody had put it up.
And so everybody else copied it.
Yeah, and it was incorrect all the way along.
A lot of incorrect information is being passed on that way.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's too bad. Well, one of the things that I worry about is the ABAA being able to sustain itself and to move forward. Back in the 70s and 80s, we had almost 500 members. Now we have about 420. We did a survey, an informal survey, and found that there were less than 10% of our membership is under 40, and more than 70% is over 60. And those figures are disturbing when you think in terms of, well, how do you read them?
Well, I think certainly with concern, but just as we were discussing earlier, Kent, who works for an ABAA member, I think will one day become an ABAA member. Young man who worked for me, Luke Bilberry, now has his own shop in Austin, just became a member. There's another 2 young men in Houston, one of whom worked for me for a number of years, and they now have primarily a presence on the internet, but they've asked me recently if I'd sponsor them as members. So I think I'm, again, more than a bit optimistic about the future of it. Because as it becomes more of a niche market and a core market, I think it'll be important to be able to establish yourself as a professional bookseller.
Do you think that specialization is more important than generalization?
Well, I'm a generalist, so no.
You see the disadvantages and advantages.
Oh, sure. I mean, somebody will pick up a book that I might have no idea, but that's their field, and boom, they know exactly what it is. However, to avoid or disdain certain areas that are good books seems to me short-sighted.
Really?
Yeah.
One of the things that I often think about is the way there is a race to the bottom on the internet.
Mm.
And it's frightening.
No.
Do you see any change in that?
No. One of the a woman offered me some books, and I declined to buy them. And she asked me what kind of books I bought, and my response was basically anything there isn't going to be 500 copies on the internet, or anything there isn't going to be 5 copies on the internet. And the race to the bottom. Another dealer I know, about 2 years ago, thought, okay, I'm going to get rid of all my less expensive books. And so he went to the internet and he found, looked them all up, and he underpriced every other copy on the internet. And 6 months later, he went back, and his was no longer the lowest price. It was, 3 or 4 times up, 3 or 4 levels.
Yeah, there's I think they're called Better World Books. They've invented a software that will make them 25 cents cheaper than any other copy on the internet.
But
automatically.
Yep. Yeah.
Automatically.
The one thing I like, though, about technology is you may have seen, I don't know exactly what they're called, but people go into book sales with their cell phones, and they have some kind of device that they can look it up and with the ISBN number and find what it's selling for. Well, I'm not interested in books with an ISBN number.
Me neither.
I want earlier books, and so they can't do that. So that if they put them aside, then I have a better chance of buying them.
Okay, well, that time is
okay.
up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oscar. Enjoyed it.